I know what you're thinking. The cat probably killed a bird or scratched himself up. And initially, I had the same thought. But then, things got weird. And look, I'm not even into spooky stuff. I'm a project manager at a tech company, and my girlfriend Sam is the most logic-minded person I know. She's a science teacher. And listen, we don't live in a weird place that gives off Netflix murder mystery vibes either. Quite the opposite, in fact. Sam and I live in an English town off the motorway. The kind of idyllic place with hamlets and cobblestones, and an old church that was built some 500 years ago. Everything about it is fashioned like it could be pulled out of one of those town and country type of magazines. A place full of old men who still doff their cap at women when walking their dogs. And where it's so safe you could see young kids walk to school over the cobblestone streets every morning. Sometimes it feels like we walked into the 1950s, and true to form, the internet can be a little bit dodgy, but the beauty and warmth of the little place makes up for any small inconveniences. Our little blue cottage is on the far end of town, up the hill that leads out, and we always consider ourselves lucky to find it. Even if the kitchen was too small, at least we got a decent sized garden. Our landlady was a kind woman who lived 2 towns away. She was one of those few landlords that always allowed cats on her property, and we moved in with our little black cat Byron on a cold February day when the grass in our front lawn was frosted and the ivy growing along the walls were utterly bare. That was 2 years ago, and honestly, we've had no complaints. We've had an IT guy in a couple of times to help us with the internet, but by and large, everything has worked the way it should, and we've been happy here. At least we were, until that night. In the English countryside, a lot of us let our cats roam free, and our cat was a feral rescue. Given the lack of cars around us and the motorway being far enough away not to worry about, we let Byron out to roam in the back garden in the woods. He'd scamper off during the day, black tails swinging and coming back for dinner in the evening when we called him. The woods began behind our house and stretched all the way into the lavender fields, and sometimes Sam and I would take walks through the path that began behind our house. Our neighbors were charming, the town was charming, our life felt charmed too. It would have stayed that way forever if Byron hadn't come home one day, black fur slicked with what looked like liquid from head to toe, eyes wide, meowing a deep, hideous meow that I've never ever heard from him. Sam and I were sitting in the garden after 8, and it had been a hot summer day due to the heat wave. Sam was wearing a pale pink summer dress, and I was in shorts. We had just finished eating our dinner when Byron appeared on the fence, his green eyes wild. He came tearing over to Sam and jumped on her lap. She laughed initially. Byron had always been a big baby and very attached to her, but then she wrinkled her nose. A strange metallic smell wafted into the air, the kind of smell you get when you walk past an alley behind a butchery, except this was so strong. It made me sick. Sam looked green too as she lifted Byron and sniffed him gingerly, then winched and put him on the ground. "What is it, babe?" I asked, although I had a horrible feeling I knew what it was. Byron was extremely agitated, and he wouldn't stop meowing. Sam turned to speak to me, and I sat back, my eyes wide.
What the fuck?
My girlfriend's pale pink dress was covered in crimson stains. Her hands were slick with deep, unmistakable red that could only be blood. She followed my gaze down to her dress and gasped.
Oh God.
At the time, I didn't think much of it. But right behind Sam, I thought I saw a tall, dark shadow move through the woods, a soft crunching of leaves under shoes. There was only a second thought, and I was quickly distracted by Byron again, who was laying on his side on the ground still meowing. Without another word, Sam picked up Byron, who was still crying, and we rushed inside the house. She put him in the cat carrier, and I raced outside to start the car as she washed her hands. When she came out, she had changed and the cat carrier was in her arms. We didn't even speak as we drove out to the vet in panic. If Byron was injured, he needed to be seen now. I had never seen so much blood come from such a small thing before in my life. Byron continued to meow in the cat carrier, and Sam was white as a sheet. We had lost a cat before, and Sam had taken it so badly, and she didn't get out of bed for 2 days straight. I leaned over and touched her arm to reassure her. "Don't worry. He's a tough little shit. He'll be fine." I glanced over at her with a slight smile, but she didn't smile back. Luckily, the vet was only a 5-minute drive from the house, and country vets tend to be a little bit more available than the city ones, so we were able to get Byron through reception quite quickly. Sam looked like she was going to burst into tears in the waiting room. Byron wouldn't stop meowing, and I felt completely helpless. What happened to Byron? Has a fox attacked him? He didn't seem physically hurt, just covered in blood. Where was he bleeding from? "Byron?" Dr. Martin poked his head out of the examination room. He gave us a smile, and his eyes twinkled beneath the glasses. Byron's meowing grew a bit softer at the sound of Martin's voice. He loved Martin, who always had treats for him at the end of every examination. Martin, tall, balding, and still smiling, opened the door to let us all in. So, what happens to be the problem? I cleared my throat as Sam put Byron down on the stainless steel table. We were hoping you can tell us. He's crying and he's covered in blood, but he won't let us check him to see where it's coming from. Martin pushed his glasses up to the bridge of his nose and headed to the cat carrier. He opened it and Byron cautiously stepped out. Something wasn't right here. He was acting so unlike his usual friendly self. Martin ran a gloved hand down his fur and then lifted his fingers to the light. Well, it's definitely blood. Carefully he checked Byron's mouth, nose, his fur, and even examined his rear. He looked up. Nothing. Not even a scratch. Something felt a bit odd about the way he said this. He didn't seem surprised. He didn't seem, I don't know, as concerned as I would imagine a vet would be, but I felt Sam nearly pass out from the relief next to me.
He's okay then.
Martin nodded, a large smile on his face that didn't reach his eyes. Well, he's definitely not injured. Something just has shaken him up. He might have killed a bird in the woods. That's a lot of blood for one little bird. The involuntary thought popped into my head. I noticed he took a swab and wiped some of the now dried blood on it. Then he buzzed for the nurse. Can you wash young Byron with medicated shampoo, please? He's made a right mess of himself. Before the red-headed nurse took Byron to the next room, Martin gave him a treat. He must have noticed my expression as I looked at the swab as he smiled reassuringly. I'm going to run some tests on the blood, just to be safe. We'll let the nurse clean him to see if there's anything we missed, but you should be okay to take him home today. Sam breathed, another sigh of relief.
Thank you so much, Martin. Do you know when we'll have the results?
Martin chuckled. Us in the backwaters here? About a week or so, I think. It'll have to go to London to get tested. He saw Sam's ashen face and quickly added, I promise you'll be the first person I call when the results are in. Thanks, I said, ushering Sam out and giving Martin a smile. Sam sat in the yard, still a bit pale, but clearly doing better. In about 40 minutes, Ginny, the nurse, brought Byron back out to us. He's been as lovely as always. A bit tired now, so he should sleep right through the night. I kneeled and looked at Byron in the carrier, and a pair of bright emerald eyes glinted back at me. He meowed softly and pawed at the cage door asking for cuddles. In a minute, mate. Let's get you home. I paid the bill, which was a whopping 100 quids as Sam took the cat carrier back to the car. As we drove out, I saw Ginny and Martin standing at the front of the clinic, watching us. We waved at them, but they didn't wave back. Instead, they just stared at us as we drove away like we were strangers they had never met. Byron slept between us that night. He was usually a more independent cat. It's like he knew something was going to go wrong. Sam sleepily stroked his belly, and I watched her hand repeat this movement until slowly I fell asleep. The next day, everything felt different. I don't know what exactly it was. It's like the flavor and taste of the whole house had changed. You know when you wake up the day after losing someone you love, and everything feels like it's just gray? It was that feeling, but neither Sam nor I had lost anything. In fact, Byron was fine. He woke up and was playful as always. Still, Sam and I didn't even speak to each other. We spent a few minutes cuddling and talking before one of us makes coffee. Today I tried to speak to her before I got up, but she was facing away from me. She just got up, fed the cat, and got dressed like a robot. Her skin was still pale, and I reached out to squeeze her hand after I came out the shower, and she didn't squeeze it back. It was like she was a ghost, and the real Sam wasn't even there. I tried to put it down to the fright she had had the previous day. We left for work, barely even saying goodbye properly to each other, when usually we hug each other so tight knowing it's the last time we could see each other for another 8 hours. As soon as my car hit the motorway, I felt a wave of relief pass through me. When I parked my car in my office parking space and picked up a coffee and a sausage roll from the cafe around the corner, I practically had a spring in my step. What was happening? Why was I so relieved to be away from my cozy little home life with Sam? I usually counted the minutes to getting home, but today my gray desk and my gray little cubicle with the ugly fluorescent lighting looked like the most inviting thing I had ever seen. I sat down to start doing back-end stuff for clients, and the hours ticked by fast. Too fast. I worked through lunch without realizing it. Before I knew it, it was 4 p.m. Usually the time I would start perking up, but instead, a hard knot had formed in my stomach. I started feeling queasy. Something felt wrong. I texted Sam hey, are you home yet? She got off of work earlier than me. I didn't get a response back, and I tried to ignore the rising panic in the back of my throat. Sam always got back to me quickly around now because we would plan dinner over text in my last hour at the office. She would usually already be cooking by the time I got home, and then I would take over and let her put her feet up. It was our routine. Today, it just felt off. The clock hit 5 and my heart beating fast. I walked to my car. Putting the key in ignition felt like signing my own death warrant. What is wrong with you? Nothing has happened, and you're acting like the world is going to end. I told myself, annoyed, as I backed out of the car parking lot. I paused and put on a ridiculously happy playlist to buoy my mood, but the feeling of dread was well and truly settled in my gut now. The whole way home, I kept glancing at my phone, hoping to hear from Sam. Nothing. I turned off the motorway towards my house, and something kept calling me back, as though this would be the end of something, as if this drive that I did 5 days a week was leading to my death, and I was just ambling along, transfixed towards it. Sam's car was in the driveway. I looked at it, then back at my phone, and frowned. The ping of a text came through. I grabbed it and read it. It was from Sam, but it was so odd. Now it's in the woods. That's it. Nothing else. I texted her back. I'm home. Are you in the garden? Should we get takeout? There was nothing back for some time. Then I saw the 3 dots of her typing coming up. My phone pinged again. Now it's in the garden. Again. This was starting to freak me out. It almost felt like someone else had stolen Sam's phone and was texting from it. My heart, already beating fast, was starting to race, hands slightly trembling as I texted her back. Sam, are you okay? Again, those 3 dots. Then they stopped. Truly panicked, my heart drumming so hard it felt like it was pounding in my head. I opened the car door and used my key on the front door, letting myself in. The house was dark. Every single curtain was drawn. I called quietly into the abyss, Sam? And then I heard it, the sound of feet running across the back wall of my house, as if someone was running along it at full speed and making their way around the corner of the house to run across the wall to my side. I locked the front door behind me just as I heard the feet pause on the door. Then I heard a heavy, unmistakable foot stomp on the wood. I backed into the darkened living room. My chest tightened with fear. The thudding continued. My phone pinged again. I looked down. It was another message from Sam. Now it's inside the house. As soon as I got that message, the thudding stopped. I frantically looked at my phone screen, the only light in the room, and I called Sam. Straight to voicemail. Desperate, I backed further into the house, blindly trying to find the back door to the garden as I texted her. Sam, where are you? Another 3 dots formed and my breathing nearly stopped. I tried calling her again, still straight to voicemail. I scrambled for the doorknob on the wall, using my phone as a light. Just as I found it and began to turn the knob, that dreaded ping sound resonated around the dark room. Slowly, I turned the face of my phone to look at it. My hand trembled on the doorknob, wanting to turn it as I read. Now, it's in front of you. I froze and slowly shone the light in front of me. At first, there was nothing, but then the sound of several joints cracking filled my ears from above. Slowly, sweat dripping from my brow and my whole body telling me not to. I looked up to see a pair of filthy, bloody feet with every single one of his toenails ripped out. I didn't wait to look further up. I opened the door to the back garden and ran, leaping over the fence into the woods. The sound of joints cracking and loud footsteps chased me, as though whatever was making that sound was at my heels. I ran faster and faster, knowing that if I kept going, eventually I would get past the trees, into the lavender fields just beyond. And maybe I could run to the farmer's house, and maybe, but something was wrong. The woods were wrong. The trees felt bigger. Path seemed too twisted and turned to another path, and then another, and then another, and all along, the thing kept up with me. It wouldn't stop. The woods seemed to have lost their endpoint. If I could just take a moment to use the map on my phone, I would be able to get out of here, but I couldn't stop because the thing could get me. And suddenly I stopped. The sounds of joints clicking and running behind me also stopped. There, in the middle of the path, was a door, a large crimson door where nothing should be. There was nothing else, no house attached to it, just a door. Then I heard it, Sam's voice, just beyond the door.
Nick, help me.
Sam? Hang on, baby, I'm coming. I screamed, racing towards the sound, but as I ran around the door to reach the sound of her, it was suddenly coming from behind me. I turned, puzzled. I hadn't even noticed the thing that was tailing me was gone. I ran backwards past the door again, thinking I misheard Sam's voice.
Nick, I'm here.
Her voice was behind me again. I wanted to cry in frustration. I was scared and panicked, and I was so sure something had happened to Sam. Her voice sounded so far away, but she was in pain and I knew she was. Sam, where are you? My brain thudded against my skull and I sank to the floor holding my head. No, I couldn't give up. I had to find Sam. I had to. I heard a quiet, unmistakable meow right next to me. I looked down to see Byron rubbing his little head against my side. I reached down, trembling to touch his head, half afraid he was an illusion. He purred and rubbed his head against my hand. I choked back a sob. He was real, and I was so relieved to see him. I picked him up and buried him against my chest, taking in his soft warmth. Tears began to fall down my cheeks as I rocked him. "Where is your mom, Byron? What has happened to your mom?" Byron just meowed, not understanding what was going on, but made no move to leave me. I buried my face into his fur to hide my tears, and then suddenly, Byron hissed and wiggled against me. I looked up, letting him go, and he ran into the woods. I wanted to stop him, but there, right ahead of me, was Sam. She was facing away from me, facing a tree trunk, but it was her. I knew her long red hair anywhere, and I stumbled to my feet yelling, "Sam!" But as I ran towards her, I slowed. She was wearing the same dress from yesterday, but it was more dark red than pink. Blood caked her legs, arms, and her feet. Her feet were facing me. Sam was facing the tree, and her feet were facing me. Contorted feet, feet with nails ripped out, bloody feet. I stumbled back as the horrible realization swept through me with a violence. I wanted to throw up.
Oh, Nick.
Sam's teasing voice bounced off the tree trunk.
Nick.
Her voice became more guttural as her pronunciation of my name became more and more nonsensical until it was a demonic cracking of joints. And then Sam twisted her entire neck towards me. That's when I saw it. Her face. I stifled a horrified cry when I saw her face. There were bloody sockets where her eyes should be. Her mouth was wide in a smile, but every single one of her teeth was missing. It was like someone had taken a knife and carved everything away, leaving nothing but a bloody mess. Her tongue jutted around madly. Her mouth mangled as she gargled from the blood-filled one's lips.
And now it's in the woods. And now it's in the garden. And now it's in the house. And now it's in front of you. And now it's in the woods. And now it's in the garden. And now it's in the house. And now it's in front of you.
She was saying it so fast, the words weren't making sense. She was reaching for me, her mangled, twisted open wound of a mouth repeating the words over and over, and I stumbled back from her, my eyes wide, until my back hit the crimson door and Sam's hand was on my shirt as she grabbed me and pulled me close. I could almost taste the dry blood on her face, the decay of her already begun. My hands, finally realizing they could do something, tried to push her rigid, wrong body away from me, but she was obscenely strong, and she gripped me hard and kissed me with that wound where the lips should be. Nausea hit me so hard, it made my knees weak. I threw up then, struggling against her. As I did this, she pushed me hard, and I fell through the door and kept falling and falling and falling through the darkness. I hit water. At least I thought it was water. There was a strange, strong smell I couldn't place. In the darkness, I couldn't tell what it is, and my eyes took some time to adjust. I moved my hands in front blindly and touched something smooth and cold. It felt like my fingers dripped, and I realized I was touching the eye sockets of a skull. I gasped and fell back into the water, but now my eyes had adjusted a bit. I was sitting amongst several decaying corpses, mountains of them, and I was sitting in blood. I wanted to run out screaming, but shock paralyzed me to the spot. Whatever had done that to them would soon come back for me, and to think I would have stayed there, white-faced it, with shock if I hadn't heard a soft meow from behind the mountains of bodies before me. It was Byron. He rubbed his head against my wet shirt, and I realized this is where he must have gotten all that blood over him from. I touched his head gently and saw he was already moving away. He must know a way out, it occurred to me. I followed him carefully, and my vision in a dark cave-like place was in and out. Luckily, he was meowing and I could hear him. I can't tell you how relieved I was to see the light. I almost cried. Byron came up to me and I hugged him, both of us soaked in blood. It was the forest, and it was getting darker, but at least I wasn't in a cave full of corpses. I nearly ran, seeking the edge of the forest adamantly, Byron struggling in my arms. Finally, I found an edge by the side of the road and collapsed there, still holding my cat tight. I didn't even notice the elderly couple stop their car and jump out to ask if I was alright. I didn't even feel them guiding me to their car. I'm now sitting here in the emergency room. They had to pry Byron out of my arms, and a nurse is watching him because I screamed bloody murder when they took him from me. All I can think of is Sarah, her face, her eyes, those woods, and the pile of corpses in that cave. I know it wasn't her who did that. It couldn't be. But they tried calling Sam many times now. She's nowhere to be found. They say they keep getting her voicemail. Her work says she hadn't been in for a week, which makes no sense at all because it was only today that she was acting any different. The hospital has called the police. I could see from the dark clothes that a cop was walking towards me. His face is heavy with suspicion, and I'm starting to realize just what Sam's disappearance and my turning up looking like this looks like, but just the thought of it is utterly absurd. I didn't do a thing to Sam. Sam nearly killed me. Didn't she? This is your